Okay. So I'm going to make a decision here. I really was struggling because you remember last week we did 16 through 18, and I really wanted to get actually through verse 21, but at the very least through verse 18, and then we ended up getting in a really involved discussion about the nature of theodicy, which is the justification of God. If God is good and God is powerful, then whence cometh evil, kind of thing, and we didn't really talk about 18 too much. But let me just I'll recap a few things we said about it. Number one, it's a metaphor that parallels the desire metaphor. The desire personified as a harlot who is luring and enticing the person to commit sexual sin with her and conceives sin and gives birth to death. And it parallels that, and there's this implicit metaphor here of God as a birthing mother who gives life to us, gives birth to life in us through not deceit, but through the word of truth. And that the purpose for this is that we should be a kind of first fruits of His creatures. Now that first fruits, I take it to mean kind of a representative portion, or maybe even the honored portion of the total. And the creatures not just of people, but of everything that God has created. Now, wisdom literature is often closely tied with creation language. We've talked about that. So if you read through the wisdom Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, you're going to see a lot of creation type language, that wisdom finds its root in creation. As a matter of fact, it is by Lady Wisdom in the Proverbs that God creates. Okay? And so here there is some discussion on what does this mean? Is it this kind of first fruits of the creatures? Is this a reference to creation? For instance, man, Adam, was the pinnacle, right, of creation. God said, let us make man in our own image. He is the final creation. He's the last piece. And in this sense, first fruits obviously would not mean first portion, because Adam's the last, but he is the honored portion, the paramount portion, if you will. He is the pinnacle of all that God has created by His word. God spoke and said, "Let there be light," and such. And so there are creation kind of reverberations going through this language, but I think that what James is doing is he does, I think implicitly quite often, is he uses these ancient wisdom streams, either these motifs like creation or theological truths, and he stretches them out over into gospel applications. And so here, I think what James is talking about, he's using this common motif of creation to emphasize what has happened through the gospel for not just man among all of creatures, but for those who love God, those who love Jesus, those who are Christians, even though he doesn't use that kind of language, those who have exercised true faith in Christ, they now have become a first fruit. A kind of pinnacle of God's work, or we might say His recreation, okay, in the church. An honored portion of what God is now doing, and a representative portion of the salvation that He is working. We might look to Romans 8 for a parallel of this, where Paul says that all of creation now is groaning as if with child pains, right? Birthing pains, until the revealing of the sons of God. And so this is a very, as James, he uses these subtle metaphors, but as we unpack them, they're very, very picturesque. They're full of expression and vibrancy here of God as a birthing mother who, as He gives birth to us through His truth, His word, the gospel, we become the paramount or the privileged portion of all that He has done. His work of art, if you will. Okay? Moving on to the next section, this is one of the better known sections of James. Let's read verse 19 through the end of the chapter. I'm not going to promise to make it through the end of the chapter. I know better than doing that, but we'll see how far we get. Okay? So, know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness that God requires. Therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away, and at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Okay. Oh, this is good stuff, and it's hard stuff. It's hard to teach this stuff, because in teaching this, we must do more than simply understand the words. We must do more than simply understand the words. For example, know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. What do those words mean? What does it mean to be quick to hear? What does it mean to be slow to speak? Slow to anger. Anyone?
Or being slow to speak.
You're being slow to speak. This is illustrative. Yes.
I think it has to do with giving of opinion.
Okay.
In that you're quick to hear somebody and put yourself in their shoes, but at the same time you're slow to speak your opinion and your wrath.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So,
good.
Road rage would be the counter of all of this.
Yeah. Right. Anybody else? What does it mean to be quick to anger, or slow to anger? Well, I mean, you could say quick to anger too. What's the opposite when you define the slow? But
well, the practical thing I think about this is like, it seems like a 10-second rule sometimes to me when it comes to arguments within a marriage or children or whatever. You know, I tend to react immediately with anger to many things.
Right.
And then I think what this is saying is listen to it, process it. Mm-hmm. Don't react with, you know, it's like in Forrest says, don't react with your own selfish desires.
And don't just assume that you know what the other person is saying, like ask for clarification or whatever and work through it rather than just like immediately jumping to anger.
Right. Right. So you've heard the phrase, listen to understand, don't listen to respond. Have you heard that? I mean, you're listening to somebody talk, but you're just waiting for them to, to breathe so you can jump in. Instead of seeing the person, hearing the person, understanding the person. Okay. All right, so you understand these words, yes? This is an easy verse. I mean, it's simple. Kids can memorize this, right? It's an easy verse. How are you doing?
It's not the easiest thing to do.
No?
No.
Not easy. So Doug is terrible at this verse. Anybody else?
I got nay, so you put his hand up.
I feel like often I fail to follow this, right? And that first thing that comes out of my mouth, I spend the rest of the conversation redressing that one sentence that you probably shouldn't have said. And the rest of the conversation is now about trying to fix that and heal that injury or wound or over response or something like that, where if you had just settled for a minute and then had the conversation, there wouldn't have been any of that at all.
Right.
And then there's also the other side of that where sometimes you say something and we want a quick response from somebody. We don't like it when they actually take time to think about it. So
Yeah. Exactly.
It's valuing somebody else's thought processes and opinions over yours. You said it, what was it, listen to understand, not to respond. Well, that implies that you value that person's
Exactly.
opinion.
Because you value that person. Yeah. Would anybody like to confess? I mean, it's kind of it's not really tongue-in-cheek, sounds like it. I'll confess. I think James is kicking my butt with this verse. I mean, he describes me here. I am slow to hear. I am quick to speak. And I am quick to anger. I often find myself talking over people. You know, and you can justify that by saying, or I can say, hey, I'm a teacher. That's just what I do. I talk. You know, I'm a teacher, I'm a preacher, and you got to talk. You know, talk. And just, you know, let me explain that to you. Let me tell you why you're wrong. Let me tell you why I'm right. Let me tell you, you know, it's just I got to, you know, you have to know my opinion. You know, it's hard just to shut up. And I'm and I'm quick to anger. And it's not just any anger. I'm an angry person. I mean, that's been part of our problem at home. I mean, the littlest things, I mean, it makes me angry. I lose my temper. It's not, it doesn't take me, you know, a while to get ramped up, and it's this immediate switch. And actually, it's probably more like, you know, the Avengers, and, you know, what is Bruce Banner's secret? I'm always angry. You know, it is not there's not a step from not angry to angry. It's just I'm angry and I'm, you know, and I don't take time to listen because I know I'm right, which is why I always am quick to speak. When you sit down and you hear this, and it's exposing, it's uncomfortable. Yeah.
I mean, is this verse, you know, referencing anything in particular, or is this just life in general? Is this just, I mean, he's not trying to address a certain area. Okay.
I don't think so. I mean, that's
anything and everything.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing with the wisdom type of literature, that it's general, kind of generalism. Now, he gets specific on some things, but generalisms are very, or generalities, I guess you might say, are very common to wisdom literature, because they're trying to give you truths that are true truths that apply everywhere and at all times. You know. So I mean, this is the kind of person that you ought to be. And when this is true of you, I mean, and he's going to go on, why is it that you should not be this kind of person? Or why is it that this is important, that you are, you know, quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry? He gives the reason there. And notice that he doesn't say because being quick to hear and slow to speak accomplish something or don't accomplish something. He says it's anger. Which makes me wonder, I know that the three of these are closely connected within myself, that I'm angry, and which causes me to be slow to hear and quick to speak. But I wonder if that's always the case. I wonder if that's more true than we realize, because James picks up only on that anger.
It's the root.
You know.
I mean, I guess when he says quick to hear, does listen mean the same thing?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah.
Because because I hear a lot, but I don't listen a lot.
Yeah.
You know, Darla's always, her comment was, listen with your face.
Right. I like that one too.
You know, and I don't always do that. I mean, I hear, you know, and I'm thinking other things. You know, I hear, you know, conversation, but you know, I don't listen. You know, so that's. You know, so quick to hear. You know, when I hear that, it says, "Oh yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I hear."
Yeah.
But it's
And it means be attentive.
It's the paying attention part that's
Right.
the downfall.
It's attentive. And so when you ask if it's something specific, he is going to get specific here, because he talks about the word. So he just mentioned the word of truth in verse 18, and going to mention the implanted word. In 22, he's going to say, be doers of the word. And so he has in mind specifically the word of God. But the kind of person who is quick to hear the word is the kind of person who is quick to hear. You know, so James's concern is how does a person who has the name of Christ called upon them, as he says later in the book, how does this person live? You know, and in traditional wisdom manner, you've got two options. There is the path of wisdom, and there is the path of foolishness. And the path of wisdom, and this person is characterized as one who is quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger.
James does that a lot throughout all of his stuff, right?
Yeah.
And this is he'll get to his analogy in the mirror in a second, right? But when we look at the mirror, you know, we are the classic example of looking in the mirror at our souls and being like, man, I could be a movie star with a soul like that. But really, there's some other stuff going on there. There's a lot of there's a lot of problems that we hide from ourselves, and it's hard to see. And James is really taking each one of those and exemplifying them and showing them. And we just talked in James about Lady Wisdom and Lady Desire, who is also Lady Folly, and other portions of the wisdom literature, right? And now James is saying, know this. This is one route, this is the other. We just talked about this. This is how you can look at yourself and see the difference. And drawing from that, right, you can go right back to Proverbs. Proverbs 1:5 says, let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. Proverbs 14:29 says, whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper exalts folly, right? And so that great understanding and slow to anger and a hasty temper and folly, that's what James is picking out here. And he's saying, look, we just talked about these two routes. Know this is the difference. And that anger never accomplishes the righteousness of God.
Yep.
This verse reminds me of just the reaction as a parent that I have when I hear a blood-curdling scream from the other side of the house. Like, after you just hear so many of them, like, you know, all your kids get upset at one point or another.
Yeah, that's correct.
You hear the sound and something just clicks in your head and you're like, I don't know, I get angry like right away and I don't even know what happened.
Yep.
It could be like somebody seriously injured or some bad situation, but you know, 99.9% of the time it's just
Somebody throwing a fit.
fighting with each other.
Yeah.
But something clicks in my head, and I've learned that's not a right response, because when I, especially if I'm in close proximity, you know, I may just yell because, you know, it's human nature. It's sin nature in us.
It's comforting to know that somebody else is guilty of the sins that you commit to.
Every parent
You're
does
gonna-
that.
yeah.
Every parent, we're gonna be honest.
Like, I should be showing some compassion right now, but I'm getting my belt off, and they're like on the other side of the house, you know.
Making sure they hear the footsteps all the way, so they have that 20 steps to refund.
to reconsider what's going on here. Am I really hurt? Yeah.
I mean, just kind of as you read that, it kind of makes me think of Peter. You know, his response as a disciple was always pretty instantaneous, and it wasn't always, it wasn't the right response a lot of times. So we've got an example, you know,
Yeah,
from him.
exactly.
So Aaron, I'm going to grasp at a straw here, but I think the outward slow to speak, slow to anger, and quick to hear, and that James points it out and says, the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. But it's interesting that he goes in to verse 21, and therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness and receive the meekness of the implanted word. And I think right therein lies the root. Not the anger in itself, and not being angry, but being filled with pride. Because what is the worst filthiness? And what is rampant wickedness but us exalting ourselves over others and over what God tells us?
Yeah, I think you're right. Let's dig into that. Okay. When I read, and the ESV, again, this is like the first version of the ESV, so I want to know if your ESV has changed this. Mine says, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness that God requires.
Mine just says the righteousness of God.
Good. I'm glad they changed that. Because that's the phrase, it's the righteousness of God. What does that mean? Okay, in Hebrew, or Greek, not Hebrew, this is a genitive construction, and there's several possible meanings here. And this version of the ESV chose one and put it into their translation. And they probably got a whole lot of kickback from other scholars saying, that's one interpretation and it isn't necessarily right. Okay? So this could be the righteousness that God provides. That's God's own righteousness that He provides. Romans chapter 1, anyone? Martin Luther? Okay? This is the way that Martin Luther interpreted the phrase, the righteousness of God, in Romans and Galatians. Okay? So here's one problem. James is not written by Paul. And we already know that at several points it seems like James and Paul contradict each other. What really is happening is that James is using language in a different way than Paul uses it, or from a different perspective. Okay? So it could be the righteousness that God provides. It could be the righteousness that God requires. I could say, let's do God's own righteousness. Okay? Or given righteousness that He gives to us. I'm going to spell it too many times and forget how to spell it. Okay, so there's, and this is just limited. I mean, there's a number of other ways that we can understand what this righteousness's relationship is to God. Okay, if we were to go with this one, the righteousness that God requires for what? Requires for what? Okay. Is that right relationship with Him? Is that covenant? Covenant righteousness? Is that how do you live in covenant obedience like we saw in Deuteronomy with God? Is it right relationship with others? No E there. Okay, so there's a lot of questions here that go into this phrase, and because it's ambiguous, we can't really nail down any one of these. Now, I'm going to say that it's not likely this. Okay, it's not that. It's not the righteousness that is God's own righteousness that He imputes to us by faith. Okay, because James doesn't use righteousness in that way anywhere in the book. Okay, matter of fact, he doesn't even use or what is it? Anyway, yeah. He does not use that in the same way that faith and works kind of language when he gets into there. So he's not Paul. All right, so when we get to the second part, then we say, well, which one is it here? I mean, if it's a righteousness that God requires, what does He require it for? And he's a bit ambiguous. This is a bit ambiguous too, but I don't think we need to narrow it down on this one. Okay? Because what have we said the book of James is about? What's the two major overarching themes, biblical concepts? I mean, he uses wisdom and prophetic language and stuff like that, but there are two major things, ideas that undergird everything here. The double love commandment. You see that here? Okay, so in a sense of righteousness, if we understand it in the way that we defined righteousness when we were in Deuteronomy, not as being declared morally pure and morally blameless and upright and sin-free and things like that, the way we use that word when we're talking about Pauline books. We understand righteousness as, what does the covenant require of me? This is what the old covenant required, and by the covenant standards, this is righteousness. Living in right relationship with God, right relationship with my community. Okay? And that's what James is about. You say you love God. Do you? Do you love God? Does it show in the way you love your neighbors? Okay? So this is the way I take this phrase. I do take it the way that the ESV translated it in the first edition, but I'm glad that they changed it. I'm glad they took it out. Okay? And so if this is true, then we can understand what is this issue about be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to become angry. These are all community terms. These are all relationship experiences. Most of the time. If you're really an angry person like me, sometimes you can be really quick to talk to yourself and argue with yourself and be angry with yourself. But generally, what we're talking about here is be quick to listen to Nathan. And not so concerned about, I just stop talking so I can tell you, I want to give you, I know the answer, This is a very self-centered person. I'm a very, sorry, no, keep hitting that thing. I'm a very self-centered person when my concern is more about telling you than hearing you. And if I can't tell you, that irritates me. And if you insist on being heard rather than listening to me, that's irritating to me. Things that, it's just that this is a very self-centered thing. It's not about, this anger is not motivated by how do I live in right relationship with you under God, because the name of the Lord Jesus Christ has been called upon us. It's about me. So that anger, human anger, does not accomplish this. It does not accomplish right relationship with God. It does not accomplish this community relationship. It does not fix the problems that we have when a rich man comes in and a poor man comes in and we treat one better than the other. He's going to talk about in chapter 2. Okay? Go ahead.
But children are exempt this, right?
How so? Children are exempt? I don't know. You'll have to explain yourself.
As a parent talking to our children, we're exempt this, right? I'm saying that tongue in cheek.
Until the age of accountability, which is not 8, it's like 34. Sorry.
I'm so good to just do whatever I want.
Sorry. I mean, 20 I'm like 21, yeah, but I don't know. I mean, my kids I got one 21-year-old and the other ones are getting, I'm not sure I want. Anyway, yeah.
I mean, when you kind of look at the, slow to speak, slow to anger, I mean, you kind of see the slow to anger on God's part as far as in his dealings with Israel.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you can say that about the other, like quick to hear.
Yes.
I mean, he's quick to hear, but I guess when you were saying slow to anger, to me that's kind of a good description. I guess is this a description of what God's qualities are?
I think so. It is reflective of God. But more of what he's doing here is, he's touching on a subject in a very kind of vague way that he is going to go into in more depth later. And that subject is, what do you do with this? Okay. The tongue is a little member that is a little, part of the body that's set among the members, and yet it sets the whole world ablaze. With the tongue we bless, and with the tongue we curse. Out of the same mouth comes both blessing and curses. My brothers, these things should not be. Can a spring bring forth both fresh water and bitter? And so he really pounds on this idea that the way a person uses their tongue betrays their heart. If you are using your tongue in this way, this kind of forked tongue, double-tongued way, then you are not loving your neighbor as yourself. You're not following the royal law. You're not loving God and receiving the implanted word that he'll mention here in a minute. And so it's if you're more concerned about speaking than hearing, then you're governed by this little thing that's a rudder. It's supposed to be a harness. It's like we put a bit in a horse's mouth and you steer the whole thing. And now instead of you controlling the bit in your own mouth, that bit is controlling you. And so the way we speak really is indicative of our hearts. And isn't that what Jesus said? Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Okay. I'm telling you, James is one of the most uncomfortable books. If you stop and be quick to hear him, slow to speak, slow to move on. Just stay a while here and hear.
Question.
Yeah.
So we're talking about knowing this stuff in your mind, knowing and reading this. But then like Paul said, and like I do all the time, I know this in my mind when I'm fighting with my wife, when I'm yelling at my kids. First thing in the back of my mind, I understand this intellectually, but I'm still spewing this stuff out to them. Mm-hmm. So I still know this, and I realize at the same time that this is coming from my own selfish desires, but then I keep continuing to cover those sins up, more sin. It seems like it just compounds on itself. Because I'm too proud to admit that my anger is coming from my own selfishness in this case.
Yeah.
So it seems like, and one thing I wanted to say to encourage everyone, if you can, is if you haven't had these feelings, then you're probably not practicing doing this. It's kind of like the shepherd. If he doesn't smell like the sheep, he's probably not a shepherd. So if you haven't experienced this stuff, I mean, you probably are not living in community with others.
Yeah.
I don't know if that
Yeah.
makes any sense.
It does, yeah. So, go
I was going to
ahead.
say, is the reason, and does he bring up the religion that's pure at the end of the passage? Just
We're not even close to that yet, man. We're not even close to that. We're not going to get there today.
the biggest contrast. I was trying to push this along. I was going to say,
You're being very quick to speak here. I mean, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Just looking at the overall, overarching theme of this section, and it seems like he's contrasting the two things: the selfishness of our hearts and where we are, and where we God calls us to be, the religion that God calls us to have. Because that's like the most unselfish thing you could do is look at, be concerned about people that have no benefit to you, orphans and widows.
Exactly. This is, James would not use the language that we use today, but it is very much the case that, you have two options. You can be self-focused or you can be others-focused. You can be introspective or outrospective, extrospective, okay? You love yourself supremely, or you love God and you love others supremely. And so James is saying these are the two ways. This is where folly is all bound up: love of self and the abandonment, the neglect of God and others. And this is where wisdom is all bound up. It is love of God and love of others, especially those who are in most need of someone to love them, orphans and widows. Okay? And I'll mention it later, but by the way, this has been on my mind a while. I'm like, I can't wait till I get there because I can say this. All of you who say Christianity is not a religion, it's a relationship, stop saying that. James says this is religion. Okay? This is religion that is pure and undefiled. Religion is not a bad thing. Bad religion is a bad thing. Okay? Pure and undefiled religion is a wonderful, excellent, pure, godly, admirable, desirable thing. Okay? But that's a lesson in 3 weeks. Anyway.
Or 4.
All right, so what is this? What is this? Put away, he says, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness. Okay, we know that. I mean, just you've got to put away. This is Pauline language, right? Put away the evil practices, the sinful practices. Specifically, your practices driven by anger and selfishness. Okay, put them away. But you can't just put them away. You can't just stop being angry. I've tried. You can't just decide one day, I think I'm not going to be angry. Okay, it's just there. You have to replace it. You have to uproot it. You have to force it out by putting something else in its place. And James says here, you get rid of all that stuff and receive with meekness the implanted word. How do you receive a word?
Hear.
Quick to hear. And it doesn't mean quick, oh, I heard it, done, move on. No, quick to hear. This means ready to hear all the time. Ready to hear, ready to hear, ready to hear all the time. That's just my disposition. I'm ready to hear. Okay? I'm not just ready to speak, which is kind of weird because that's what I'm doing right now. But you're ready to hear. If you're not ready to hear, you cannot receive the word. When was the last time you put yourself in a position to say, God, I'm ready to hear this? Did this verse sting you? If not, then you didn't hear it. And receive with meekness. You have to be willing to say, I need to hear this. I cannot accomplish the righteousness of God by myself. I cannot put this anger away. I need to hear. Hearing and needing to hear, knowing you need to hear, being ready to hear, means that you recognize that you have to receive from someone else what you don't have. So receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. And this implanted word, again, I think is the gospel. It's not. I think it's a mistake to take every time we see the word in the Bible to mean this. Okay, it's not the whole Bible. It's a specific word here. It is the gospel that he has in mind. But we receive this implanted word. Now, notice this. He's already said in verse 18, of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth. So the word has already been active in us. It has already given birth to us. So what is the difference between that and now we who have already been affected by and birthed by the word, now receiving the word and being saved by it? Clearly, this is not first, let me just point out, again, this is not a Pauline picture. We read this, say, receive the implanted word which is able to save your souls. That means get saved. No. This is not a Pauline conversion language. The conversion language came in verse 18. He brought us forth. He birthed us by a word of truth. That's the salvation language. That's the conversion language. Okay? Here it's something else. What's the difference? How do you receive the word? Well, let me point this out. I'll point one thing out, and then you can say. So, you said go do it. That's verse 22. Be doers of the word. So between we're born by the word and we are doers, practitioners of the word, there is this middle place, receiving the word. Okay? So, sorry, go ahead.
Well, it was kind of, I think, along Nate's line as far as it's active. It's an active thing in us now. It's not, which comes out in the way we treat others or or
Okay.
that's,
Okay. That side of the table is really quiet this morning. I'm just pointing.
Well, at first I'm trying to find and make sure I'm not taking it out of context, but I think it's...
You're slow to speak.
Well, talking about, a banging gong or a clanging cymbal. You're just making noise.
1 Corinthians 13.
Is that, okay, well, I wasn't even right into the Bible, but it made me think of that verse, that when you're sitting ready to, drive right in, you're just making a bunch of noise that doesn't need to be heard yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking of, when it comes to sin, you mortify the sin, but if you don't fill it back up with something, you're just going to have more and more sin. So in this case, receiving the Word of God is it not reading the instructions that He's given us? Do we have to, the principles that He's given us are here in the Bible. And you said don't go all the way to the Bible, but where else are we going to get these principles? We have to have the rules before we can go do the rules.
Right. I think you're on the right track, but I think it's deeper than knowing and doing the rules.
Is there like a plant motif in here, like where God, am I like reading that right? Like
Yeah, there is. It's implanted. Yeah, implanted word.
like where God gives birth to through the words of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits, and then I lost it. Except the word planted in you. So, I mean, it's kind of like a picture, it's like a word picture of the work that God does in us. He saves us, but then after He saves us, we grow in Him and the Word. We grow in the gospel.
Yeah. So here's the way I think about it. So you receive present tense. I don't know if the Greek is present tense. I haven't looked at it, but in the English anyway, this is a present command. Okay, receive the word, which is the implanted word. Okay, past. It's already been implanted. Okay, so he is telling you to receive something that is already in you. My analogy is organ transplant. What does it look like to have an implanted heart and not receive it? Yeah, your body begins to fight against that foreign object, that organ. Okay, and although it may have lengthened your life, it's not going to sustain it, because your body is literally attacking that organ, saying, we don't accept this, we don't want it, we're pushing it out. In the same way, I think that's what, even though he wasn't talking about organ transplant, obviously, I think that's the idea that's going on here. God has already given us birth by the word of truth, and He's implanted that word in us, and receiving it means accepting it as the rule and standard of our living. The gospel shapes us, defines us, determines us. It means putting ourselves in a position that we can, again, hear the Word of God, this implanted Word, and be shaped by it. And once we are in this position to be shaped by it, then we can do it. We can practice it. And that means that we are going to have to take time and stop talking and just sit with the Word and meditate on the Word, meditate on the reality of the gospel, and say, God, speak, for your servant listens. Okay? Wow. 3 verses today. You guys talk a lot. It's a good conversation, though. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you